Good morning, everybody. This is What Does the Bible Say? This is our, excuse me, morning broadcast, our Bible class that we do every Wednesday, I almost said Sunday, every Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. And today we are doing part number 2, Introduction to the Prophets. And so, based on what we did last week, there probably are a number of you who are saying, well, I thought we'd actually be getting into a book of the prophets. And so if you remember what I said last time, I said I think that Kings and Chronicles are very underread, and I don't know which one would be more so, but the books of the prophets are very, very underread, and we said that people do them just like they do Joshua. They know about the Battle of Jericho, which really wasn't a battle. They know about the fall of Jericho. That's it. And that's all they want to talk about because that's all they know. And when you get over to Judges, they only want to talk about Samson because that's all they know. And when they come to these books of the prophets, Christians only want to talk about the points of it that they know, which is very, very limited. And like I said, primarily, it will be things like the Holy Spirit and Joel 2, I'm saying Ezekiel 36, but there's so much more going on. And so what I think and what I've heard people say is, I would read those books, but when I get in there, I don't know what's going on in there. And so that's what we're trying to do today is I want to give you more background. Like we said, part number 2, I want to give you more background so that when you get into those books, you say, yeah, I know what's going on because I had these introduction classes. I know who the big players are. Like we said, there's 4 big players in the prophetic books. It's Israel and Assyria. That's who takes them into captivity. And then it's Judah and Babylon. So you're just operating on these 4 big players. And yes, kings switch out in the storyline. And so you say, well, I have to keep up with all these kings. That's true. But that's not that difficult if we're all being honest. And like I showed last week also, the bulk of the changing out of characters is going to be happening around 2 Kings 15. They're going to swap out a list of their kings and then move from there. So it's just not that difficult. And I'm saying, too, a lot of people are making an excuse because, to be honest, they don't want to begin to read. They don't really want to begin their study process. They look off and they romanticize. They say, yeah, I'd like to know the Bible and I'd like to have conversations with the Bible, with people about the Bible. And I have to say, too, what they want to do, there's a lot of people that they romanticize about being a know-it-all and chopping everybody up. And it's like, 2 Timothy 4:2, I believe, preach the word, reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long-suffering and doctrine. And it's a bunch of people who romanticize about reproving and rebuking, and they maybe do it once or twice, and then they never let you forget that they ever did it. They just love that story about themselves. There's so much more going on inside of your Bible, and also as we're doing your Old Testament. We're talking about character studies. We're talking about becoming a better person. We're looking at these Old Testament texts and say, well, if the prophets prophesied to a particular people way in the past, why do I need to read it? So that you don't make the same mistakes that those people were making that basically ended in the fall of 2 nations. How about that? Nations are made up by individuals, and individuals' character matters to the whole collection of the nation. So this morning, this is Intro to the Prophets, Part 2, 276-806-3641. That's my phone number. And if you email me at calebgrobertson@gmail.com, we'll get you on the Informer list, which is a page-and-a-half Bible article that we send out every Sunday morning. So you're getting What Does the Bible Say at Sunday night at 9, Wednesday night at 9, Thursday night at 8 p.m., What Does the Bible Say Bible class for 2 hours, Wednesday mornings 10 a.m., and then on Sundays you're getting a page-and-a-half Bible article, and this one was part number 2 to questionnaires and creeds. There are a lot of people out there who would say they don't believe in creeds, which are a list of itemized, you have to believe this. They say they don't believe in creeds, but then they form questionnaires. And if you don't make a 100% on their questionnaire, then you're out. And so that was last Sunday's discussion. Email me at calebgrobertson@gmail.com. and we always say this when we get started, the design of this Bible class, what does the Bible say, School of Preaching? We are not interested in creating brotherhood hotshots. We are not interested in creating politicians. And also what we say about ourselves is we are not interested in having our own personal disciples. And what I mean by that is I have said plenty of times, Christians who are my friends, you don't have to defend me personally, but when it starts coming down to biblical principles, then yeah, you have to defend biblical truths. And so when you hear someone say, that Caleb, he's out there teaching blah, 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 and whatever it is, and usually it's not anything that I teach, it has to do that I'm maybe calling out one of their favorite teachers. I don't expect you to defend me personally, but the truth that is in that equation, that needs to be taken up for. So if what I'm saying happens to be true, that's fine. I'm saying take up for that. But if they're just coming on and they're saying, well, I don't like me, I don't like Caleb, blah, 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 whatever. It's, you and I both know it's not that they dislike me. They don't know me. They just don't like, I would say, the cognitive dissonance. Their favorite preacher is being called out by Caleb. They see the evidence, and so what are they going to do? Well, they say, I'm not going to go over here and correct my favorite preacher. Look, we're not looking for personal disciples. What we just want you to do is better know your Bible, which if a handful of people know their Bible better, it creates for a better congregational atmosphere. If you have in your mind to use your Bible knowledge to edify rather than just to self-promote. I was reading, this is a biography, an autobiography, and this man was writing about his childhood that would have been in the 50s, late 40s and the 50s. And he said in the area that he grew up, there was this one Bible class teacher, and all he wanted to do was teach on premillennialism, and he was for it. All he wanted to do was preach on premillennialism, and when the congregation said, we're getting tired of just premillennialism sermons, he'd say fine, and he'd go to another congregation, and he'd teach on premillennialism until they got tired of it, and he'd just go down the road. You don't want to be that person. You want to be able to teach books of the Bible, epistles of the New Testament in their context and bring out how it affects my day-to-day living, how it increases my faith, builds greater faith in Jesus of Nazareth as the Christ. So we say, help you better know your Bible without moving across America, and the whole design is to prep you for evangelism, and that's really our first point this morning when we say prep you for evangelism. Do you care about anybody? I have it on there about agnostics, but honestly, man, our brethren as a whole are so unevangelistic. And the biggest marker that they have for, quote, loving the Lord is whether or not you love sound doctrine. And my thought as we go into class this morning is, we're a collection of people who for generations have been collecting and categorizing sound doctrine. And what are you doing with it? Because this is basically what my dad has gotten over the years. My dad, Johnny Robertson, and what does the Bible say, has been debating charismatic holiness apostolics. What is that fella's name? He died. Armando de Loa. So he debates Armando de Loa. He can debate a charismatic holiness. He can debate the Nation of Islam. And he debates Baptists. And he debates hardcore 5-point Calvinist Shirley Phelps. He debates an agnostic, Bob Lawson. He debates full-on atheist Larry Serber. And here's my thing. The collection of people who say that the biggest marker of loving the Lord is if you love sound doctrine, Johnny Robertson comes out and he debates all of these people who are either sectarian, agnostic, or atheist. And what do the people who love sound doctrine say to that? Well, we don't like debate. And we certainly don't like the way Johnny Robertson does it. Well, he's promoting sound doctrine. My where I am right now is I'm basically realizing that my brethren really don't give a hoot about sound doctrine. They don't share it with anybody. And when the person who does get up and he shares, and I'm talking about young Christian men across the country, when they start getting the idea that they're going to share sound doctrine with sectarians in the local community, no, young man. That's when all of the, I'm saying, unqualified false elders are going to come down on him. The preacher is going to worry about, well, we're discouraging him, but we all know that we don't want to get involved in this. That's why I say anybody, not just agnostic. Do you care about anybody? People talk about, plenty of people have said it about me and said it about my dad. Well, they just don't have the love of Christ. And it's like, how do you think you are displaying the love of Christ? Because if we're all being honest, again, local congregations are often made up of traditional folk who really don't like each other. And at the drop of a hat, you upset their feelings, they're gone, they're never coming back. And really, you say they're never coming back, they weren't there to begin with. And we all know that. We say they're present in body, absent in spirit. So, I want you to start really thinking about this idea of we are supposed to be talking to people. And, it's like we clothing drives and food banks and bread houses and whatnot. The Methodists here locally, they had like a dentist day, come and get your teeth worked on. Who teaches gospel? John 17, 20, 21, neither pray I for these alone, but for them also which shall believe on me through their word, that they all may be one. So the idea of Christians is that we are supposed to be taking non-believers, turning them into believers, Jesus of Nazareth, believers in Jesus of Nazareth, and as we are collected believers, we ought to be one, we ought to be unified. And you look at the religious scene and you say, well, we're certainly not unified. Well, what are you doing to bring about unity? Which is going to involve people talking to each other. Now, my thought today is when I'm really honing in on agnostics. Do you understand this statement? I know that you do. There are Bible students, and then there are churchgoers. And we all recognize the difference, right? There are the people who are very serious about understanding their Bible, and I'm saying these people who are very serious about understanding their Bible, they are doing it. They are students of their Bible because they realize it is good for them. And because it is good for a person, they want to share it with other people. And then there are churchgoers. They don't know any Bible. They don't care about anybody. They have the simple idea of getting their ticket punched. And even when you say getting their ticket punched, it's not so much that God is punching their ticket. It's their family members. They come in on Sunday and sit in the pew for an hour so that their family members will punch the ticket and not be on their back. I got news for you. A lot of people could drop out from getting their ticket punched on Sunday, and again, their family members wouldn't care. They'd just turn around and they'd say, well, what do you expect me to do? Withdraw from him? He's my family member. There are Bible students, and then there are churchgoers, and then here's my next point. There are agnostics, and then there are people who really don't know what they think. And you say, well, that's the definition of an agnostic. Is he saying they don't know? No. I'm saying an agnostic is somebody who is at least looking at the possibilities. They are looking at evolution and the atheism that goes with it. They're looking at creationism, and you might say they're not looking very well. They're looking at these, quote, churchgoers that you all abide, the lukewarm churchgoers, and the agnostics look at those people and say, they ain't looking. And they're right. These churchgoers are not looking. This is purely tradition for this crowd of people. And this crowd of people, who really ought to just be done away with, are hurting this crowd of people, the agnostics. They're looking, and you say, well, they shouldn't be looking at the people. They don't really know that, do they? And I don't know why you're saying the agnostics shouldn't look at the churchgoers, because churchgoers look at other churchgoers, and that's how they decide what they're going to do. I'm worried about these people. These people have had their chance. That's it. Jimmy Lovell says every person deserves to hear the gospel once more than any person deserves to get it twice. And these people have gotten it thousands of times and they just don't care. These people out there looking and they say, I just don't know how to make heads or tails out of it. There are agnostics, and then there are people who don't really know what they think because they haven't looked. Remember I had that series of papers, a response to a local agnostic, and he had this list he said, well, the Old Testament is racist. So I gave him an article that he didn't read, and I proved out of the Old Testament that it's not about race. It's not about skin color. And the Old Testament doesn't promote slavery, men stealing either. So I did that. He said, well, the Old Testament is misogynistic. So I answered that, gave him an article that he didn't read. And there were a number of things that he had about the Old Testament. The more and more I talk to him, he hasn't read any books. He just, I'm just saying, when you're that point, he hasn't had time to accumulate the information, but he's already making these hard conclusions. And the more I talk to him, he hasn't looked at anything. He's just parroting something that he heard someone else that he likes say. Don't do that. Don't parrot me, right? Do this research for yourself. Now, here's my point, and what we're going to look at today. There's more than one way to talk to an agnostic. You can go, when you're talking to these people who say, well, I don't really know what to think, you can talk to them and you can go down the science route, creationism versus evolutionism. And so this is a book I recommend, Brad Harrop. I have read this book, Convicted, a Scientist Examines the Evidence for Christianity. And what you will very quickly find out is you talk with people, you talk with an aggressive atheist, you're going to find out very quickly that PhDs don't really matter. You only like PhDs who are on your side. And Brad Harrop has his PhD, I believe, in neurobiology, and he wrote this book, Convicted, and he also has written his own textbook that can be used in schools, Science Examining the Evidence, Biology, Brad Harrop. And so that is a textbook, a lab manual, and then I believe a teacher's manual. And so you can go that route. I love that he does it, right? And he owns his own coffee shop. And what he did was recently, he opened up his coffee shop to a creation seminar. And it packed the house. And there's a lot of people out there that would say, well, I'm not going to mix my religion with my business. And that's exactly what Brad Harrop did. And it's fantastic that he did it. He, like I said, he packed the house and he gave people evidence for creationism. Now, this is an older book, but it's still very good. Theistic Evolution by Bert Thompson, PhD. And one thing that my dad has told me, a story about Bert Thompson, that why he likes Bert Thompson, is he said Bert Thompson, let's say he came to Dallas and he was going to do a creation discussion, right? He was going to prove creation versus evolution. And one of the things that Bert Thompson did was that he wanted advertising for the meeting. Advertised the meeting, and he actually went out and tried to find people who were atheist, agnostic, skeptic, and to invite them to the meeting. And Brad Harrop has done that too. This is the book, Theistic Evolution. Well, God created the universe, but God put evolution into the process. And so the big question is, if that's how it works, when on the evolutionary process did the animal that becomes a man form a conscience? Where did that come from? So, Theistic Evolution by Bert Thompson, again, a PhD. You can go the philosophical route, and as I show you these books, the design is to read the books, right? I read the books, and I have a lot of people who talk to me, and they'll say, they want to see it. They say, well, how do I find that? How do I see it? You have to read books. There is no quick way around this. There is no secret. And like I have told you before, my knowledge was not given to me through DNA that came from Johnny Robertson. I have had to work hard, as he has had to work hard, and these other people who don't know anything, it's because they don't work hard. That's the thing. You have to read these books. You have to talk to people you disagree with. It is going to take time and energy. Have atheists proved that there is no God? Thomas B. Warren. Thomas Warren, also PhD. He has a PhD from Vanderbilt in philosophy. Have atheists proven there is no God? Sin, suffering, and God. Then his debate with Antony Flew on the existence of God. And so you get in contact with these agnostics, and they say, well, I just don't know that God could be real in a world that so much evil takes place. And that's where Thomas Warren jumps in. He says, how did you get this idea of evil if there's not this ultimate picture of good? Where are you getting these rules that when you say, hey, you moved into this category, that's evil? Where are you getting all this if you don't have a universal standard? Philosophical route, scientific. And this is one that really ought to be used, and my brethren haven't appealed to it very much. Alfred Kazin, he's a Jew, but he wrote the book God and the American Writer. L.C. Sears is a Christian, and he wrote a book called Shakespeare's Philosophy of Evil. I have read that book. Here it is. L.C. Sears was one of the presidents of Harding College way back when. But my point about this is, the agnostics call it a book of fairy tales. And so my question is, how does a book of fairy tales become this endless inspiration for what we call classic literature? Whether it's, and I'm saying Herman Melville wrote Moby Dick, and the loads of biblical quotations that are in Moby Dick. I can't think of her whole name. Stowe, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, was writing that book from what she considered to be a place of moral obligation. William Faulkner, loaded with biblical references. Shakespeare, loaded with biblical references. Why is it that all of these, quote, thinkers, and Ernest Hemingway, all of these thinkers and writers keep making reference to this book that you say is just so silly? You can talk about science, philosophy, classic literature, and you can talk to them about archaeology. The Bible and Archaeology, Thompson, Stone's Cry Out, Randall Price. You could look at either of these books, and this information is out there. Now, what I want to do today is I want you, at some point, to revisit this class, okay? Go to the playlists, and I'll just take a moment with you. What does the Bible say? Johnny Robertson, YouTube, what does the Bible say? You go to the playlists. You see how I did that? And then scroll down until you find Life of Christ. Click View Full Playlist on Life of Christ. And then what you're going to find is, you're going to find the one class, Where Did the Herods Come From? When you get done with this class, you should go back and you should rewatch Where Did the Herods Come From in the Life of Christ. And so here's my thing now. Here's what we're doing today. Your Bible in the world's history, your agnostic neighbor says, keep your book of fairy tales to yourself. Okay? All right. Do you care about them? Are you saying, well, they're just rude and I'm not going to talk to them again? You don't get to be that way. You don't get to have Jesus saying, turn the other cheek. If they take your coat, give them also. Go the extra mile. You don't get to have these agnostics be rude to you and say, well, I'm never going to talk to them again. I'm saying the bulk of them, they really haven't given too hard of a look, and they probably have had a, quote, bad experience with sectarianism. I don't doubt them at all when they say, I had a bad experience. I'm saying, look, I hear you. I probably believe it, and it's probably true. But you're going to have to look at this information and realize that it exists, and most of them don't know that it exists. So they say, keep your book of fairy tales to yourself. They say, Jesus isn't real. Jesus is part of the fairy tale. And they just go on and on. They talk trash. They find these particular scriptures that they don't like. But I'm saying, let's just start at this point here, okay? Does he even exist? World history. Roman officials, Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, both give record that a Jewish man named Jesus from Galilee existed and was crucified by the Roman governor Pilate. You have secular history that at least documents the existence of a man that you, a moment ago, the agnostic said, didn't exist. And maybe the atheist said that, and the agnostic said, well, I'm going to watch this conversation and see how it plays out. But the atheist says, no, he did not exist. Well, here is Josephus, and we have his works, and he is a Jew who participated in the Roman Jewish wars in the first century, and he documents the existence of a Jew, Jesus, from Galilee, who was crucified by the Roman governor Pilate. Now you have these individuals agreeing, and I'm saying modern Jews today, like for instance, Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro will say Jesus existed, but he does not believe in the deity of Christ. He does not believe the idea that Jesus is the Son of God. His take is, he said he just was a rebel-rousing Jew. He said, and there was a long line of them who got himself into trouble and they killed him. But the idea a moment ago was he does not exist at all. Plenty of secular references will say Jesus existed. Well, then the next part is, you say, fine, Jesus existed, but there's nothing to his disciples, his followers. And my thing is, you're actually leaving, you're giving me that the hero exists, and now you're going to try to attack the lesser individuals. Jesus is the absolute hero. He's the star of the moment, and you're giving in that he existed, but now you're going to start attacking the lesser individuals, which are his disciples. And I'm saying, you start looking at the world's history in the Bible, and you're talking to your agnostic friends, and this is introduction to the introduction. You say, how are you going to make this apply to kings and the prophets? Just give me a moment. That's Charles Colson, and if you can't see it on the screen, he's holding up a book that says Nixon. Who's Charles Colson? Charles Colson was one of the individuals who participated in the whole Richard Nixon Watergate scandal, whatever you want to call it. And when an agnostic says to you, keep your book of fairy tales to yourself, and they might give in that Jesus of Nazareth existed, but they start attacking the apostles' testimony. Look at what Charles Colson says about the existence of Jesus and the testimony of the apostles of his resurrection. Charles Colson says, I know the resurrection is a fact, and Watergate proved it to me. How? Because 12 men testified that they had seen Jesus raised from the dead. Then they proclaimed that truth for 40 years, never once denying it. Everyone was beaten, tortured, stoned, and put in prison. They would not have endured that if it weren't true. Watergate embroiled 12 of the most powerful men in the world, and they could not keep a lie for 3 weeks. You're telling me the 12 apostles could keep a lie for 40 years? Absolutely impossible. So you give in that, okay, Jesus existed, but then you start doubting the testimony of the apostles. This is a moment ago when I said PhDs only matter when they're on your side. Why is it not the case that an individual who just said 12 of the most powerful men in America, you might question it now, but I'm saying at that time, and I would say now, America has been the most powerful country in America. And then you take its leaders, and he said these leaders of the most powerful country in the world could not keep their story straight for a number of 3 weeks. And he looks at the biblical text and he says there's no way that these 12 people endured all their persecution and kept it together, willing to die for it. Charles Colson, you say, well, he's not the best. And here's another one. Dr. Simon Greenleaf, he is a doctor of law from Harvard Law, and this is obviously older than Charles Colson. But a doctor of the law, he says that the testimony, he looked at the New Testament text, he compares all the documents and their particular testimony of the resurrection, and Dr. Simon Greenleaf says the testimony of the 12 apostles would stand in any court across the land. Now, you have all of these points of reference, the secular evidence that Jesus of Nazareth at least existed. You take the corroboration of the apostles' testimony, you compare it, you look at their lives, and trained lawyers say this would stand up. But now I'm saying, if the Bible is a book of fairy tales, how is it the case, and this is your class today, okay? Kings, Chronicles, and the Prophets. How is it that this document consistently lines up with the world's history? And so, this is a point we're about to make. You say, Caleb, I would read Kings, I would read Chronicles, and I would read the prophets. And you say, but I never know what's going on in those books. Well, let me show you something. You have 4 players. Israel goes into Assyria. Judah goes into Babylon. 4 players. But then you start reading your text and you say, well, the kings of Assyria keep switching. Yeah, kind of like America gets new presidents. It's not a big deal. In 2 Kings, you have Tiglath-Pileser III. 2 Kings 17, you have Shalmaneser V. Sargon, king of Assyria. Sennacherib, king of Assyria. And that's Isaiah 20. And then 2 Kings 18:13. Now, all of these people in the agnostic's mind exists. And there's really no doubt to it. They go to the British Museum and they see all manner of documentation of the Assyrian Empire. And these 4 kings in particular. Tiglath-Pileser, Shalmaneser, Sargon, Sennacherib. And so we look at these people and we say, yes, these are all actual figures who existed in the world's history. And my question is, why are we taking them to be real and ignoring the fact that they are all documenting their interaction with the people who you claim are fairy tales? Now, someone's going to get into this and they're going to say, well, Caleb, we never said that Jews didn't exist. What you said was the Bible was a book of fairy tales. And I want you to explain to me how one moment it's a book of fairy tales and then the next minute it is very historically accurate. Here's what we're going to do. Most people don't know this. Whether they're, like I said, I'd always talk to this agnostic guy in the coffee shop. He doesn't know this stuff any more than he did not know the other information that I tried to talk to him about. He'd attack, for instance, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the Law of Moses. He was always down in the Law of Moses. But when I would talk to him, he had no knowledge of what the Bible actually says in the first 5 books. So why am I going to basically expect that he has any knowledge of Assyrian artifacts that have been found over time? Most Christians don't know about this. And I'm saying to you, the common agnostic does not either. Most people don't know that the Assyrians actually documented their wars with Israel. And this large artifact is Shalmaneser III, which is going to be before Tiglath-Pileser, Shalmaneser III's black obelisk, which is discovered in 1846. Now you look at that and you say, as far as the eye goes, we have much prettier stonework. Yes. And you say, no one doubted that the Assyrians existed. I got you. I understand that. But when you start looking at, and when they went through and they studied this obelisk and they compared it to other archaeological finds, this is what they came out with. They came out from the obelisk, Shalmaneser III's black obelisk, with a picture of King Jehu bowing to Shalmaneser III, paying silver, and this is what the quotation, the translation would be. Silver, gold, a gold beaker, golden goblets, pitchers of gold, lead staves for the hand of the king, javelins. Again, discovered by Sir Henry in 1840. Now, one of the things too, if you look at this and you look at some of the other data, they're going to call him Jehu of Omri. And you're going to look at your biblical text and you're going to say, well, Jehu is not out of Omri. Omri is the father of Ahab. When you find these nations, whether it's Rome in the New Testament going to war with the Jews, the Romans in the New Testament text did not keep up with what Jews were doing. When they get Acts 23 going, let's look at this. In Acts 24, verse number 3, we accepted always in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness. And then he says, we have found this man, Paul, to be a pestilent fellow, a mover of sedition among the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. So when the Romans look at the church, really all they see are Jews, and they look at it and they say this is a subsect of Judaism. But if you were to talk to a real Christian, in that time frame, they would say, look, we're not a subsect of Judaism. Really, they would say, Galatians chapter 6, we are the children of Abraham and they are not. They're physical descendants, but we possess the faith of Abraham. You can't expect the government officials to always be keeping up, and when you look at other Assyrian data, they just called Israelites Omri, which is pretty interesting when you go back to 1 Kings, that he had that much influence. And certainly the house of Ahab and then generations onward. But they would just refer to northern Jews as those of Omri. So when they see Jehu and they just call him Omri, that's in line with their other manner of speaking. But my big point is 1 minute people went from calling the Bible a book of fairy tales to now making discoveries in 1840 that this foreign nation, the Assyrians, are actually documenting the subservience of the Israelite people. And you say, well, when did Jehu give any type of gifts, and really it would be extortion, to the Assyrian people? Look at 2 Kings 10:32. What you might say, what do I need to know about these rocks? What you need to know is that the world's history gives credence to what you call the best book in existence. Why would you not want to know that? And you might say, well, I already know, Caleb, that's the Bible's the best book in existence. We're not talking about you. We're talking about these agnostic people, young people who you are supposed to care about. Because as a disciple of Christ, Mark 16:15, you are supposed to go out and teach every creature. But my brethren usually don't do that. What they do is they stay in their local four walls and they bicker at each other. And then they go to lectureships where they talk trash about people who don't want to be with them any more than they want to be with them. We are supposed to be missionary-minded. We are supposed to be evangelistic. We are supposed to be making disciples, and that includes atheists, agnostics, and skeptics. And so you need to know that this is in your text. In those days, the Lord began to cut Israel short. This is still the house of Jehu. Jehu had 4 generations that were on the throne in the northern tribes. And in those days, the Lord began to cut Israel short, and, however we say his name, Hazael, smote them and all the coasts of Israel from Jordan eastward. Now the rest of the acts of Jehu and all that he did and all his might, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? And Jehu slept with his fathers, and they buried him in Samaria, and Jehoahaz his son reigned in his stead. At that time, Jehu reigned over Israel and Samaria 28 years. And you say, well, what did we get out of that? If Hazael is smiting the coast of Israel, do you know what they're having? They are having exchanges of goods, which is exactly, and you say, well, this is Syria. Syria is a tributary nation to the Assyrian Empire. What does that mean? They're doing Assyria's bidding, and then they themselves have to pay tribute just as much as Israel's going to have to do. But the big thing that you need to be taking away is you have a moment of scriptural documentation that matches the archaeological find, an archaeological find that actually makes reference to people who the skeptics and agnostics are saying, we don't know that they even existed. Jehu, written about by the Assyrians, discovered in 1840. Here's the next one. You go from Jehu's son, Jehoahaz, to Jehoahaz's son, Jehoash, or also called Joash, and look at what you also find. It says, he received tribute of Joash the Samaritan. Again, another artifact found of Assyrian origin that actually gives reference to the grandson of Jehu, who a moment ago people were saying, well, this is a book of fairy tales and the people don't exist. Now, I didn't show the book earlier. We just had it on the screen. You go through, this is the Bible and archaeology, and you can find these books, all of them, you can find them relatively cheap. You buy them, you need to actually read them, you need to study them, write it, or make your notes so that you can remember this stuff, because you want to make disciples. Look at 2 Kings 13:25. Jehoash, the son of Jehoahaz, took again out of the hand of Ben-Hadad, the son of Hazael, the cities which he had taken out of the hand of Jehoahaz, his father, by war. But if you know the context of 2 Kings 13, it says 3 times did Jehoash beat him, and recovered the cities of Israel. But ultimately, what did Elisha say to him? You're going to prevail a couple of times, but ultimately, Syria is going to defeat you. And so what do you have? Syrian tributaries, who then, tributaries to Assyria, come in and they defeat Israel, and you have secular archaeological documentation. He received tribute of Joash the Samaritan. So we're having what the Bible tells us, and then 1967 is when they discovered this artifact, and then it just keeps lending credence to what we're looking at. Now, here it is again. This is now moving from, who was that? You have Shalmaneser III. Now we're moving into Tiglath-Pileser III, and you find him in 2 Kings 15. But look at what this says. This is an Assyrian artifact discovered, and that is supposed to represent Tiglath-Pileser in his army, military chariots. And what do you find Tiglath-Pileser from his histories? Tiglath-Pileser III. As for Menahem, I overwhelmed him like a snowstorm, and he fled like a bird alone and bowed to my feet. I returned him to his place and imposed tribute on him. 2 Kings 15:19. Pul, and you say Tiglath-Pileser, Pul is going to be a Babylonian reference to Tiglath-Pileser. Pul, king of Assyria, came against the land, and Menahem gave Pul 1,000 talents of silver, that his hand might be with him to confirm the kingdom in his hand. 2 Kings 15:19. You cannot have these people, when you read about it in Kings, and say, well, this is all fairy tale, and they're all coming from a line of people that who knows even existed, and you get people who go all the way back to the book of Genesis, and they call a ton of information from, and again, Genesis. Bert Thompson has a second book called Is Genesis Myth? Bert Thompson, is Genesis, boy, that's hard. Is Genesis myth? And a lot of these skeptics will go back to Genesis and they'll just call it all this poetic idea that gives these people a history, but none of it's real. Well, if their history's not real, then they don't have anything to base this action off of. And then someone looks at this text and says, well, we don't even know that half of these people are real. But you're getting archaeological finds that say Tiglath-Pileser put tribute on Menahem out of 2 Kings 15:9. And then you go on and you find, again from the histories of Tiglath-Pileser III, they overthrew their king Pekah, and I placed Hoshea over them as king. 2 Kings 17:1-3. In the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, began Hoshea, the son of Elah, to reign in Samaria over Israel 9 years. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, but not as the kings of Israel that were before him. Against him came up Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, and Hoshea became his servant and gave him presents. This is not a contradiction. This text here says that Tiglath-Pileser put Hoshea in the place of Pekah after Pekah was conspired against. He can put him into power, and then as powers transfer in Assyria from Tiglath-Pileser III to Shalmaneser V, the tributaries go along with it. That's not a contradiction. But again, what we have is both the Bible keeping track of Assyrian kings, Tiglath-Pileser, Shalmaneser, and them doing the exact same thing. You go from the house of Jehu, his grandson Joash, again in their artifacts, Jehu to Joash to Pekah to Hoshea. You're having all of this cooperation, all of this agreement, while simultaneously trying to call the Bible a book of fairy tales. And we move from Shalmaneser V to a king named Sargon. Isaiah chapter 20, verse number 1. In that year that Tartan came unto Ashdod, when Sargon, the king of Assyria, sent him and fought against Ashdod and took it. And this is the big one, y'all. You have Tiglath-Pileser in your Bible. Tiglath-Pileser then leaves his histories where he documents putting Israel into tributaries. You then get Shalmaneser in your Bible, and you have this documentation. We're moving into Isaiah chapter 20, and what I'm also simultaneously doing is teaching you how to navigate Kings, Chronicles, the prophets, and the book of Isaiah, because the book of Isaiah really is compiled into sections. In Isaiah chapter 20, you're going to say, well, how did I know that? You're going to have to read the text. The biggest thing about understanding and figuring out how to navigate and maneuver these texts is you have to read them. And you're going to have to read them more than once. But this is, as I said a moment ago, this is the big one. Because while we look at these artifacts that have been discovered by archaeologists and they line up with the Bible, I have no problem putting this out there. This is where the skeptics come back in and they say, okay, Caleb, I get it. You got Jehu with Tiglath-Pileser, or from Shalmaneser III. You've got his grandson, Joash, being referenced in Assyrian artifacts. You've got Tiglath-Pileser III talking about Pekah and Hoshea and putting Israel to tributaries. And they said, but when you come to Isaiah chapter 20, verse number 1, you're going to have zero archaeological evidence for any Assyrian king named Sargon. And so what they do is they come in and they say, because you have zero evidence for a king named Sargon, everything else, they say, everything else that you thought you had going for you is now going out the window. We have now, in their minds, because we have no archaeological evidence for a king named Sargon, though it's in the Bible, we are now moving backwards to, quote, fairy tale status. Until 1843, when Paul Emile Bada, on an archaeological dig for cuneiform bricks, discovered an entire palace in a hillside covering an area that would actually be the size of 25 acres. And you know what it is? It's Sargon's palace. We went from, quote, having zero evidence to having an entire palace, Sargon, with his histories, the annals of Sargon. So we went from zero evidence to a wagon load of evidence. And my question is, did that change the skeptics? Many of them just dropped it like a hot potato and they just moved on to the next thing. And my point about that is, you are going to talk to a lot of dishonest people. What can you do about that? Nothing. You can move on. You can start trying to talk to other people. You can look at them a little bit longer and you can say, well, I think I'd like to do a little bit more work with them. And you might quote Ronald Reagan at him. Ronald Reagan said, if you can't show somebody the light, you can at least let them feel the heat. And you put, hey, I'm fine with putting pressure on a dishonest agnostic. You're not moving. You're not in the realm of agnostic where you say, well, I don't know. You're just being dishonest. You guys, skeptics, atheists, agnostics, were hugely attacking the Bible because you had not found any archaeological finds for King Sargon of Assyria. And then when his whole palace is discovered and his histories line up with the Bible, from the annals of Sargon, look at what he said. I marched quickly in my state chariot against Ashdod, his royal residence, and I besieged and conquered the cities of Ashdod, Gath, and he continues his list. And what does Isaiah 20, verse number 1 say? In the year that Tartan came unto Ashdod, when Sargon the king of Assyria sent him and fought against Ashdod and took it. And you know, I said a moment ago, dishonest skeptics, that when this evidence was brought out, a number of them didn't change. They just went on to the next attack against the Bible. Look, you can't fake this, right? Someone says, well, there are options to this, you know. After the fact, someone says after the fact they could have basically put this stuff in place to make up for a king that didn't exist. You're telling me that they actually built a whole palace and then somehow it became hidden, and within the palace are historical documents that then line up with the Bible after the fact? Why would you not just say, hey, we missed it? Now, Isaiah 20, Sargon is matching up just like Tiglath-Pileser and Shalmaneser in 2 Kings 15. And then, you know, it goes on. He said, I took Ashdod, correct, Isaiah 20, verse number 1. But then there's another note in the annals of Sargon that says, he has this quote where he says, I besieged and conquered Samaria. led away as booty 27,290 inhabitants of it. The town I rebuilt better than it was before, and settled therein people from countries which I myself had conquered. I placed an officer of mine as governor over them, and imposed upon them tribute, as is customary for Assyrian citizens. So a moment ago, what we had was an Assyrian king discussed in the Bible, and the skeptic said, no, he doesn't even exist. You guys made that up. Well, then we find his palace, so we now know at least he exists. He conquers who he said he conquered. The Bible says he conquered in Isaiah 20. He goes against Ashdod and Gath. But then we have this note that he says, I also conquered Samaria, and I brought in foreigners to Samaria. Here's 2 Kings 17. Settled therein people from countries which I myself had conquered. Now, let me have a moment with you. This is where, you should be with me in your Bible, because you want to learn pagination of your Bible. That's why I say, get a Bible that's good. I recommend a King James wide margin so that you can put your notes in it. And stick with that Bible so that you can remember where things are. Because, on the day that I'm talking to a skeptic and I cannot remember 2 Kings 17, I'm going to know that the Assyrians are at the end of the book of 2 Kings, right? At the end of 2 Kings is where I'm going to find Assyrian literature. And because I have a wide margin and because I write in my Bible, I know that when at some point on my right page, on the right side of my page, I'm going to come to a note that's highlighted King of Assyria, and out to the side I'm going to have written Sargon. Sargon's annals say, I took Samaria and I brought in foreigners. Look at 2 Kings 17, 23 through 28. So was Israel carried away out of their own land to Assyria unto this day. And the king of Assyria brought men from Babylon, from Ava, from Hamath, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the children of Israel. That is exactly what the annals of Sargon say he did. We're not even done, but I'm saying, maybe you didn't know this, right? Well, now you're seeing it and you're saying, man, we have options. You can talk to an agnostic, the scientific route. Talk to them about the scientific route. You talk to them about the philosophical route. Where are you getting this idea of good and evil? And as I said a moment ago, literature is a very important part of our society, and the Bible has influenced classic literature. And now we're looking at archaeology and just world history. How is it possible that one book covers every field? And part of the science field for, Brad Hare wrote the book Convicted. There's another book, when I said it covers every field: science, philosophy, history, archaeology, and then just literature, which is art, health. There's another book out there called None of These Diseases. And do you know what they look at in the book None of These Diseases, which is a promise in the book of Exodus, where God says, if you'll do these things, none of these foreign nation diseases will come on you. So you basically have inside of the Bible promoting heterosexual monogamy. Do you know what you're not going to get if a society was really committed to heterosexual monogamy? You are going to not have STDs. Right? And so then they also take other portions of the Old Testament text that inside of the Old Testament, in the Law of Moses, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, when you are reading the book of Numbers, they full on had a recipe for what we would call lye soap. They had all manner of teaching on washings, and they had all manner of teaching of removing their waste, right? Their human refuse, what to do with corpses, what to do with wild animals. They had so much information for their time, and I get really tired of people like Bill Maher always referencing the Bible and calling it the Bronze Age, when it's like you go to 1700s Ireland, and they were still just throwing their waste out of an upstairs window. Old Testament Jews had more sense than that. So when you look at this is what I'm saying. Sargon goes from not existing to us finding his entire palace and finding his histories that line up with the Old Testament text. How is it possible that the book, the Bible, covers all fields and stays accurate? He says, I brought in these foreign people. They possessed Samaria, and it was so at the beginning of their dwelling there that they feared not the Lord. Therefore the Lord sent lions among them, which slew some of them. Wherefore they spake to the king of Assyria, saying, the nations which thou hast removed placed in the cities of Samaria know not the manner of the God of the land. Therefore he hath sent lions among them, and behold, they slay them, because they know not the manner of the God of the land. Then the king of Assyria commanded, saying, carry thither one of the priests whom he brought from thence, and let them go and dwell there, and let him teach the manner of God of the land. Then one of the priests whom they had carried away from Samaria came and dwelt in Bethel, and taught them how they should fear the Lord. So we're still not done, but do you see all this information? Tiglath-Pileser in your Bible, archaeological, historical evidence. Shalmaneser, Sargon. Sargon is huge. Now, here's what we have to do. We're moving off Sargon, and we're now introducing Assyria to Judah. And this is a moment where someone says, okay, look, you said a moment ago that Assyria has to do with Israel. Now you're saying it has to do with Judah. You're going to have to stop this business of like wanting everything to just be a piece of cake for you. They do have contact with Judah, but I'm saying as far as the captivities go, Israel goes into Assyria, Judah goes into Babylon. And I'm saying Assyria and Babylon have connections. It's going to be Merodach-Baladan who comes in from Babylon, and it's right on the heels of Hezekiah and Sennacherib. But let's do this first. 2 Kings 16, verse 5 and 6. This is your northern tribes. Rezin, king of Syria, they're foreign. Pekah, son of Remaliah, king of Israel, came up to Jerusalem to war, and they besieged Ahaz, but could not overcome him. At that time, Rezin, king of Syria, recovered Elath to Syria, and drave the Jews from Elath, and the Syrians came to Elath, and dwelt there unto this day. He said, that has nothing to do with Assyria. Yes, it does. Wait a minute. What you have is the northern king lining up with a Gentile king, and they're now going to do battle against Judah. Can I have a moment with you about something we discussed last week? Remember how I said, we asked that question, why does Jonah hate Assyrians so much? And then someone comes out, I'm saying a teacher, a Bible class teacher comes out and he says, well, Jonah's a Jew and they hate Gentiles. No, they do not. A Jew will work with a Gentile anytime that it is self-serving to Israel. See what I'm saying? You got to stop that business on Gentiles are worse than a dog. No. And when we get over to 2 Kings 17, at some point we'll have the discussion about where the Samaritans came from. You're going to have to stop that business about, well, a Samaritan is worse than a dog. God is concerned about all of these people, which, coming to our modern times, should translate into what? We ought to be concerned with people. Getting the message to them. And that moment ago where Sargon put the teaching priests back into the country, what was that? That was Gentile evangelism. Sargon, they said, well, they don't know the God of the land. And Sargon says, put a priest back over there and let him teach them about God. And so what did everybody do? They became informed about the God of heaven. Gentile evangelism, write it down, put a note in parentheses next to your Gentile evangelism. That's how Romans chapter 2, verses 12 through 15 works. Now, these two kings, Rezin and Pekah, they make an alliance, a confederacy. And this is where you introduce Isaiah 7. Okay? Let me have a moment. You say, this is an introduction class. I got to have you knowing what's going on in the prophets so that you'll read them. And you say, well, this is so detailed. You have a wide margin Bible. Hopefully by now. What you do, you watch this class, you can pause it, you can rewind it, you can come back and you can watch it later. But what you just simply need to do, this class is not difficult. You write it down on your notepad. This is how I get to do my classes. I do all of my own study. And as I'm doing my study, I write it down. And then I build my PowerPoint slides to come in here. And then as I review my own notes and my own PowerPoint slides, I am deciding for myself what is of enough value to then write down in my wide margin notes. And then I come in and I teach the class. And so what I say for myself through my preparation of the class and my delivery of the class, I get to have at least 4 layers with my study. I read, I write it down, I build the slides, I teach the class 5 layers, I revisit and make my notes in my wide margin. Now, you say, Caleb, I would like to have the memory that you and your dad have. I'm putting in 5 layers to what I do. And some of y'all, I can barely get you to read your Bible. If you want to be serious, and I want you to be serious, and you want to become evangelistic, this is what it takes. Now, some people are going to say, Caleb, you and your dad, when you talk about you're having 5 layers, and you say you're setting the bar too high, and you know what I say back to that person? You're setting the bar too low, and people still don't want to come up to that. So either we're going to shoot for the absolute best, or we might as well just quit playing, because that's what a lot of people are doing, piddling and playing. Layers. Right now what I'm doing is I'm teaching you how to navigate these sections. And what you're seeing is that 2 Kings 16 lines up to Isaiah 7. It came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, that Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, went up toward Jerusalem to war against it, but could not prevail against it. And it was told to the house of David. If you say that's too small, we want to try to have it all on the screen, but you got your Bible open, so that's okay. But could not prevail against it. And it was told to the house of David, saying, Syria is confederate with Ephraim, and his heart was moved, and the heart of the people, as the trees of the wood are moved with the wind. Then said the Lord unto Isaiah, Go forth now to meet Ahaz, thou, thy son, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool in the highway of the fuller's field. And say unto them, Take heed and be quiet, fear not, neither be faint-hearted, for the 2 tails of the smoking firebrands, fierce anger of Rezin and Syria, because Syria, Ephraim, the son of Remaliah, have taken evil counsel against thee, saying, Let us go up to Judah and vex it, let us make a breach therein for us, and as the king in the midst of it, even the son of Tabeel. Thus saith the Lord God, It shall not stand, neither shall it come to pass. For the head of Syria is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin, and within 65 years shall Ephraim be broken, that it is not a people. Now, that's really important for you to highlight in your notes, because that's what we actually said last week was, when I go through and I note from Jeroboam II in 2 Kings 14 to the end of basically what would be King Hoshea in 2 Kings, I said last week we're looking at about 60 years. And what did Isaiah just say in Isaiah 7, verse number 7? It says, Within 65 years, that's 65 years, Ephraim, which is Israel, shall be broken, that it is not a people. And that's what Hosea chapter 1 says. You are not a people, you're not my people. Head of Ephraim is Samaria, the head of Samaria is Remaliah's son. If you will not believe, surely you shall not be established. And you keep reading, and he says, More of the Lord spake again unto Ahaz, saying, Ask thee a sign of the Lord thy God, ask it either in the depth or in the height above. But Ahaz said, I will not ask, neither will I tempt the Lord. And he said, Hear ye now, O house of David, it's a small thing for you to weary men, but will ye weary my God also? Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive, and shall bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. Butter and honey shall he eat, that he may know how to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the child shall know to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land that thou abhorrest shall be forsaken of both of her kings. One moment. Okay. Both of her kings the Lord shall bring upon thee and upon thy people and upon thy father's house, that days that have not come from the day that Ephraim departed from Judah, even the king of Assyria. And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall hiss for the fly that is in the uttermost part of the rivers of Egypt, for the bee that is in the land of Assyria. And they shall come and shall rest all them in the desolate valleys and the holes of the rocks, upon the thorns and upon all bushes. In the same day shall the Lord shave with the razor that is hired, namely by them beyond the river, the king of Assyria, the head and the hair of the feet, and it also shall consume the beard. Now you probably noticed something in there. Isaiah 7 verse number 1 clearly says this is about the confederacy of Syria and Israel against Judah. Rezin and Pekah against Ahaz. And who's going to put Pekah and Rezin down? The king of Assyria. And as we read through that, somebody saw in verse number 14, how does that fit in there? Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. And you say, this is clearly a discussion about the tribes, Israel, Judah, Syria, and Assyria. How does this text work itself in there? And I will say now what I said last week out of Micah chapter 5. In Micah chapter 5, you had that moment where it talks about Bethlehem of Ephratah. And that's the text that they cite in the New Testament about where the Messiah would be born. But you keep reading in that text and you say, well, this clearly is talking about the overthrow of Assyria. So how does that work? And really what I can say is, can I just leave that for you as a taste of what is to come, and you come back later and we'll cover it in the prophets class? But right now we're doing introduction of the prophets. I have to introduce to you so that I can show more. I have to introduce to you at the moment how Assyria even comes in contact with Judah. And this is it. Isaiah gives a message to Ahaz about the confederacy against him, and he says God is going to deliver you. But what does Ahaz then do? You go backwards, or back over to 2 Kings 16, and you read this in your text. So Ahaz sent messengers to Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria. There you have it. The players are Israel goes into Assyria and Judah goes into Babylon. But in the middle, Judah comes in contact with Assyria through hiring them as help. Ahaz sent messenger to Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, saying, I am thy servant and thy son. Come up and save me out of the hand of the king of Syria and out of the hand of king of Israel, which rise up against me. Now, I'll go ahead and say for you as you read through the text, and we can talk about it and you can think about it. It is tough for me when I read this because Isaiah told Ahaz, Assyria is going to beat these men for you. So, Ahaz steps away from that and he says, well, am I supposed to give them money, to attract them to do it? You look at these situations, and these are some of these moments where I say some of these people may be trying to make the best sense out of it that they can. We look backwards in the book of Genesis and we look at Abraham and we say some of his moves, like, telling people, hiding the fact that Sarah's his wife because she is his half-sister. But sometimes we look at that and we say, that wasn't always the best move. And I look at him and I say, hey, that's a man trying to maneuver the best that he can. You can't just do it right all the time. And so I look at Ahaz, and he hires out the king of Assyria, and I look at that and I say, Isaiah did just tell him that Assyria is going to be the one who defeats that confederacy. So Ahaz took silver and gold that he found in the house of the Lord and in the treasure of the king's house and sent it for a present to the king of Assyria. And you might look at verse number 8 and say, yeah, but every time that a king of the north has practiced that, it doesn't work. Same thing with Asa in 2 Chronicles 16. He defeats the Ethiopians, but when he has a second large battle, he starts trying to pay off individuals. Well, why didn't you just fight and win the battle like you did the first time? The king of Assyria hearkened, verse number 9, the king of Assyria hearkened unto him, for the king of Assyria went up against Damascus and took it, and carried the people of it captive to Kir and slew Rezin. And it says, King Ahaz went to Damascus to meet Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, and saw an altar that was at Damascus, And King Ahaz sent Urijah the priest to fashion of the altar and the pattern of it according to all the workmanship thereof. And Urijah the priest built an altar according to all that King Ahaz had sent from Damascus. So Urijah the priest made it against King Ahaz, came from Damascus. And when the king was come from Damascus, the king saw the altar, and the king approached the altar and offered thereon. He burned his offerings, burnt offerings, and his meat offerings, and poured the drink offerings, and sprinkled the blood of the peace offerings upon that altar. And he brought also the brazen altar which was before the Lord, and from the forefront of the house, from between the altar and the house of the Lord, and put it on the north side of the altar. And King Ahaz commanded Urijah the priest, saying, Upon the great altar burn the morning burnt offering and the evening burnt offering. And that is always that reference that we make back to the book of Exodus. The daily ministration, once in the morning, once in the evening. Which I'm saying, I believe to be the most integral part of their system. The priests offering for the sins of the people, morning and evening. That's God's mercy, God's grace. And Ahaz just moved the daily ministration from God's altar to Tiglath-Pileser's altar. Now you say, I don't understand that. We'll just wait a moment. Upon the great altar burn the morning and the evening offering, the king's burnt sacrifice, and his meat offering with the burnt offering of all the people of the land, and their meat offering and their drink offerings, and sprinkle upon it all the blood of the burnt offering and the blood of the sacrifice, and the brazen altar should be for me to inquire by. Thus did Urijah the priest, according to all the king Ahaz commanded. And King Ahaz cut off the borders of the bases, and removed the laver from off them, and took down the seat from the brazen oxen that were under it, and put it upon the pavement of stones. And the cover for the Sabbath that they had built in the house, and the king's entry without, turned it from the house of the Lord for the king of Assyria. So, you look at that and you say, well, this doesn't make sense why he's doing this. And I would say it does make sense. This man who says, my delivery just came from Assyria. And you basically start thinking of, well, and I'm saying it's short-sighted and it's not very well thought out, but it's a thought nonetheless. My neighbor, Assyria, just delivered me from my enemies, and he has his own God. What do you make out of that? Well, the king says, well, I might want to start adopting his God to be my God since he came and delivered me. Well, you go back to Isaiah chapter 10, verse number 5, and you basically just say, that's where I say it's short-sighted, not well thought out. Couldn't Ahaz have said, well, couldn't the God of Israel, Jehovah, just use the Assyrians? Isaiah 10:5 says, O Assyrian, the rod of my anger and the staff in their hand is my indignation. I will send him against a hypocritical nation. Of course he could have used a Gentile nation. And someone can look at this and they say, well, Caleb, I think that there's more to it. No, it's possible. Either way, as I said, it's short-sighted and not very well thought out. And it also doesn't really consist with too much historical data either. Now, what I'm doing is, give me a moment, because I want to go backwards and I want to find the daily ministration that he changed. Look at Exodus 29, 38, and 39. Okay, we're back, and we think we have the bugs out. Now, what did we just see? We're seeing out of 2 Kings 16, out of Isaiah 7, the confederacy between Pekah, king of Israel, Rezin, king of Syria. They make a confederacy against Judah, King Ahaz, and Assyria. Tiglath-Pileser comes, and he defeats Israel and Syria or Judah. And what you get out of that is then Ahaz adopts the idolatry of the Assyrians. Now, this is where we're moving forward. What we have looked at in today's class, and we've said archaeological finds that substantiate the biblical text. Tiglath-Pileser III, Shalmaneser V, Sargon, Isaiah 20, and now we're moving into our fourth point in this Bible class, Sennacherib, king of Assyria. Now, 2 Kings 18, 2 Chronicles 32, Isaiah 36:1. They all go together. These are the moments where people say, this is why I don't read my Old Testament text, because it is so confusing, they say, that one minute I'm reading 2 Kings 18, then I have to read 1 Chronicles, and then way later I'm going to get to 2 Chronicles and I'm going to read all of this stuff all over again. And then when I get to Isaiah, I'm going to read it all over again for a third time. And I'm saying that that's a bad way to study the Bible. What you ought to be doing is overlapping them. Now, someone might say, well, if I was studying my Bible on my own, I wouldn't have figured that out until I had done a solid read-through. And you at least just did a solid read-through. Now you know, hey, I could have been overlapping them, and it would have given me that much more information as I did it. So, let's do it. Hezekiah begins to reign in Judah. 2 Kings 18:13 says, in the 14th year of King Hezekiah did Sennacherib, king of Assyria, come up against all the fenced cities of Judah and took them. 2 Chronicles 32 says, after these things, the establishment thereof, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came and entered into Judah, and camped against the fenced cities, and thought to win them for himself. Now it came to pass in the 14th year, Isaiah 36, 14th year of Hezekiah, that Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the defenced cities of Judah and took them. Now, here's what we have happening in Hezekiah's time frame. Ahaz sets up an idolatrous altar after his dealings with Tiglath-Pileser III. You move in from Tiglath-Pileser, you move in from him, and then you find Hezekiah removing the idolatrous elements. Now it came to pass in the 3rd year of Hoshea, son of Elah, king of Israel, that Hezekiah the son of Ahaz, king of Judah, began to reign. 25 years old was he when he began to reign, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Abi, the daughter of Zechariah, and he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord, according to all that David his father did. He removed the high places, and he brake the images, and cut down the groves, and brake in pieces the brazen serpent that Moses had made, for unto that day the children of Israel had burned incense to it. Now, I'm still in Exodus 29 in my book, so let me turn really quickly to 2 Kings. Now, what you will find in 2 Kings 18, look at 2 Kings 18:13. It says, in the 14th year of King Hezekiah did Sennacherib, king of Assyria, come up against all the fenced cities of Judah and took them. And Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent to the king of Assyria to Lachish, saying, I have offended. Return from me. That which thou puttest on me will I bear. And the king of Assyria appointed unto Hezekiah, king of Judah, 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. And verse number 15 does say, Hezekiah gave him all the silver that was found in the house of the Lord, the treasure of the king's house. And at that time did Hezekiah cut off the gold from the doors of the temple of the Lord, and from the pillars which Hezekiah king of Judah had overlaid, and gave it to the king of Assyria. And the king of Assyria sent Tartan and Rabshakeh from Lachish to king of Hezekiah with great hosts against Jerusalem. Now, your options are that Hezekiah paid tribute, and then right away they basically said, well, if he's paying tribute, then we've just got him, and they're going to move in. Or what you have is the option of he pays the tribute, they're satisfied for a while, and then they come back in. But what you absolutely have happening is he gives them tribute money. He says, look, I have offended, please leave, we'll give you these pieces of extortion. He gives them this, but you also, at some point in time, have him taking away the idolatrous monuments that Ahaz had put in place, which, when you get in 2 Kings 18:22, is an insult to Assyria. When you have Rabshakeh coming against Hezekiah, look at one of the things that he says. Now behold, thou trustest upon the staff that this bruised reed, this is 2 Kings 18:21, bruised reed, even upon Egypt, on which if a man lean, it will go into his hand and pierce it. So is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, unto all that trust on him. But if you say unto me, we trust in the Lord our God, is not that he, whose high places and whose altars Hezekiah has taken away, and hath he said to Judah and Jerusalem, you shall worship before this altar in Jerusalem. So what do you have? Ahaz took an altar from the king of Assyria, and then Hezekiah takes it down. And you have the Assyrian king coming in, Sennacherib, king, and his captain Rabshakeh, coming in, intent on taking these people, and they actually make a reference. They said, you lost the battle when you took our idols out, which is what they would have been thinking since 2 Kings 16 with Ahaz, because he brought in their altar. So you have all of this going on between Judah and the people of Assyria. We have looked at Tiglath-Pileser earlier. We looked at Shalmaneser's black obelisk. We looked at Tiglath-Pileser's histories, where he documents the northern kings of Israel. Joash, Jehu's grandson, being documented on Assyrian artifacts. Sargon's palace being found. And now what we have is another archaeological find called Sennacherib's Prism. And look at what is written, what is documented historically, an archaeological find. It says, himself, Hezekiah, himself I made a prisoner in Jerusalem, his royal residence like a bird in a cage. I surrounded him with earthwork in order to molest those who were leaving his city's gate. Hezekiah did send me later to Nineveh 30 talents of gold, 800 talents of silver. And just like we read in 2 Kings 18:15, there is a documentation in your biblical text where Hezekiah says, we don't want this. We don't want any trouble with Assyria. And he sends them money. 2 Kings 18:13, Sennacherib's Prism documents his interaction, Sennacherib, the Assyrian king, his interaction with a Jewish, which he would say of Judah, Hezekiah of Judah, had him caged in like a bird in a cage. And here's where we started out this morning, where we said, you can't look at Jesus and say, book of fairy tales, when you have secular documentation giving credence to a man, Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus of Galilee, crucified by a Roman governor named Pilate. You leave that, you say, okay, well, he existed, but we don't believe the things about him. And then you move over and you start looking at the testimony of the apostles, their witness to his resurrection. And when government officials and trained lawyers and lawyers who train other lawyers look at the biblical testimony of the apostles, they say it would stand in any American courtroom. Then you go back to the Old Testament text. You have all that in the New Testament, but now we're going through the Old Testament text and we are finding years worth, 60 years at least, 65 years at least, information, and then it goes back before that to the house of Jehu. All of this historical alignment between the world's history and the biblical text. And it lines up totally together, and I'm saying even to the point where, again, Sargon's palace, the skeptics really thought they had the Bible, and then they found a whole palace with information on the inside. And what you now have out of Sennacherib's Prism is this. During the Sennacherib invasion, you have this note. You have, here it is, Rabshakeh, and the king of Assyria sent Tartan and Rabshakeh from Lachish to King Hezekiah with a great host against Jerusalem. And they went up and they came to Jerusalem, and when they were come up, they came and they stood by the conduit of the upper pool, which is the highway of the fuller's field. And the king of Assyria sent Rabshakeh from Lachish, this is Isaiah 36, to Jerusalem and to King Hezekiah with a great army, and he stood by the conduit of the upper pool in the highway of the fuller's field. Now, you say, well, what about the prison? Wait a second. This is its own entity. We're now going to look at something separate in the time frame of Sennacherib's invasion against Hezekiah. Sennacherib's Prism gives context, gives discussion in 2 Kings 18:15, but now look at this. When you look at Sennacherib's captain, Rabshakeh comes against these people in Jerusalem. And if you read these texts outside of today's class, you're going to find Sennacherib is very aggressive, very antagonistic, and fully intent on taking the city of Jerusalem. And one of the things that Hezekiah, very quickly in the story, he says, the Assyrians have brought themselves to an outside pool. And when Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib was come, and that he was purposed to fight against Jerusalem, he took counsel with his princes and his mighty men to stop the waters of the fountain which were without the city, and they did help him. So there was gathered much people together, who stopped all the fountains and the brook that ran through the midst of the land, saying, Why should the kings of Assyria come and find much water? Rabshakeh's on the outside of the city. He's crying out to the men on the wall, all of his threatenings, very antagonistic. And at some point, as it said, they're outside the wall and they're next to a pool. And Hezekiah says, well, if they're going to be here, we can camp out on the inside of the city and they're not going to get any water. 2 Chronicles 32, 2-4. 2 Kings 20, verse number 20, and then 2 Chronicles 32, 20. The rest of the acts of Hezekiah and all his might, and how he made a pool and a conduit and brought water into the city, are they not written in the book of Chronicles of the kings of Judah? 2 Chronicles 32:20 says, This same Hezekiah also stopped the upper watercourse of Gihon and brought it straight down to the west side of the city of David, and Hezekiah prospered in all of his works. Sennacherib's Prism, same moment in history. Hezekiah's Conduit, to where he is stopping the flow of water for those outside of the city and leaving it inside of the city for the inhabitants of Jerusalem, essentially while they wait out this invading army. And this is what you have. Discovered in 1838 by a U.S. Bible scholar, Edward Robinson, they find the conduit, the tunnel carved out for the water flow through Jerusalem. Now, I believe this picture is supposed to represent his own daughter standing in the opening of the conduit. And you find this in the story, and basically what you're going to have is skeptics will look at 2 Kings 18, and they'll say, they couldn't have done that at that point in time. You have Sennacherib's Prism. You know Hezekiah is a real person because the skeptics trust the archaeological finds. The archaeological find, Sennacherib's Prism, gives credence to the existence of a Jewish king in Judah, the southern tribes, named Hezekiah. They have their battle, they have their tributaries, but you have this moment where they're plotting an invasion, but they cannot get any water while surrounding the city. It's in the story. Edward Robinson makes the discovery in 1838. And not only do they find the water channels, the conduit, and the collection pool, not only do they find that, they then find what now is called the Siloam Inscription, discovered in 1880, which basically, on the inside, discovers and explains two teams tunneled from opposite ends, and they met in the middle, which would be about 1,753 that they actually chiseled out, worked through, both ends to the middle, solid limestone. And my point about this is some extremely detailed, historically backed fairy tales. The text tells how they basically were able to withstand an outside invasion. They're not going to have any water. We have all the water. They had the passageways and the ability to control the water flow. And then people just look at that and they say, well, in that given time, there's no way that they would have done that. But then in the 1800s, you make the discovery. Edward Robinson finds Hezekiah's Conduit. 1880, they discover the inscription on the wall, Siloam's inscription, that tells it was two teams working this tunnel, both ends, and they met in the middle. You go back to this slide too, and you say, well, this is neat. It's not just neat. This is part of your discussion for in the city of Jerusalem, where, a skeptic could say it, but basically a sectarian that doesn't believe in water baptism, they could say it. There are these people that when they get to Acts chapter 2 and 3,000 people are immersed in the city of Jerusalem, there are plenty of people who will go to that text and say, there's not enough water in Jerusalem to baptize 3,000 people. To that person, we would all have to say, you have no clue what they had access to waterways. not only is this a reality that has been discovered in archaeological finds back, and I'm saying stated in the Old Testament text, but then when you go to the New Testament time frame where baptism would have become a commandment for the people, I believe the term was mikvahs, where they have in the city of Jerusalem just these, it's called a mikvah, and then you're going to use another word, an alcove that's put out to fill water for their Jewish washings. There's plenty of places and plenty of water to do baptizing in the city of Jerusalem. Now, you have this, and one more. When you then leave Sennacherib, just one more, we're almost done. Sennacherib and his captain, Rabshakeh, they pull away from Jerusalem. The text says in 2 Kings 19 that Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed, went and returned and dwelt at Nineveh, and it came to pass as he was worshiping in the house of his idol that these two individuals, his sons, smote him with the sword, and they escaped into the land of Armenia. And then it says here, and his son, Esarhaddon, his son, reigned in his stead. And again, another discovery, archaeological find, his histories. I called the kings of the country Manasseh, king of Judah, king of Edom, king of Moab. You find more and more archaeological, historical credence to the Bible. So a moment ago I said, it's the most detailed, quote, fairy tale you ever heard of. And some of these pieces, they really thought that they had the Bible on the ropes, and I'm saying like the instance of Isaiah 20 and Sargon. And they discover his whole palace plus his histories. But we're not even done. This is part 2, and I'm saying we are going to start getting into actual prophetic books because now we have a picture of what's going on. There are 4 players. Israel goes into Assyria. Judah goes into Babylon. Today we looked at the Assyrian kings. We're getting all of our layout together, and as you look at all of this historical information, there is one more point about Sennacherib and Hezekiah, where the skeptic is going to say about the Bible. They're going to say, Caleb, archaeology does not prove the miraculous slaughter of the Assyrians. And you're going to find this in 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles, and in the book of Isaiah. They said unto him, Thus says Hezekiah, This day is a day of trouble and of rebuke and blasphemy, for the children are come to the birth, and there is not strength to bring forth. It may be the Lord thy God will hear all the words of Rabshakeh, whom the king of Assyria, his master, has sent to reproach the living God, and will prove the words which the Lord thy God hath heard. Wherefore lift up thy prayer for the remnant that are left. So the servants of King Hezekiah came to Isaiah. And Isaiah said unto them, Thus shall you say unto your master, Thus says the Lord, Be not afraid of the words which thou hast heard, which the servant of the king of Assyria has blasphemed me. Behold, I will send a blast upon him, and he shall hear a rumor, and shall return to his own land, and I will cause him to fall by the sword in his own land. So Rabshakeh returned and found the king of Assyria warring against Libnah, for he had heard that he was departed from Lachish. Continuing in 2 Kings 19. And it came to pass that night that the angel of the Lord went out and smote in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000. When they arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpse. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and went and returned and dwelt at Nineveh. And then that's where he is conspired against and assassinated. And so we find all these archaeological finds that give credence to the Bible, and they prove, they give the evidence for the existence of Sargon, but we come all through that, and as skeptic and agnostic still says, that doesn't prove the miraculous slaughter, and I'm saying, back to them. Sennacherib's Prism, where he says, we had the Jews caged in like a bird. So you have Hezekiah shut up in a cage, and then just suddenly, you don't. And you never come back, and you never take Jerusalem. And it's not Assyria who takes Jerusalem, it's going to be Babylon. And I'm just saying back to a skeptic, you're questioning the miracle, the agnostic, you're questioning the miracle. Militarily speaking, there is no answer for this. That you have them absolutely caged in, and then somehow you still lose. And I'm saying these are all people who were not supposed to exist anyway. So what are they talking about? Secular history lines up with the Bible. These are just the moments where agnostics say, I don't know about that. And that is what an agnostic says. They're on the fence. They don't know what to think at the moment. But I'm saying, if you start going through science, philosophy, classic literature, health, morality, and what we did today, archaeology, you're just not going to be able to keep withstanding against the idea that God created the universe. And you watch this class today and you say, wow, Caleb, that was fantastic, incredible information. And I'm asking you, you were a student in this Bible class, what do you make out of that? And you say, well, what you just said. God's the creator of the universe. Well, you did come into this class saying you already believe that. And I'm asking you to think about this. What do you make out of the idea that God is the creator of the universe? And the correct answer is Psalm 8:4. It's, we're here. We obviously exist. How did we get here? And someone says, well, God created everything. And I say Psalm 8:4, it's not that he just created everything. He is mindful of you, and he's mindful of me. If there's 7 billion people in the world right now, and all the people who have existed prior to us that make up our history, he was mindful of the individual as much as he is now currently mindful of the individual. And I have to say, I think that's what is the amazing aspect. Because like I said, we are here, and if he's God, the all-powerful, then him creating it is the give-in. The amazing aspect is that he is even mindful of us. And what's one of the aspects that he shows that he's mindful of us? And that's where someone says, well, all of this, he's the ultimate lawgiver. And then that's where I say, well, what do you make out of that? Because just saying it, he's the ultimate lawgiver, I would say, the creator of the universe who is mindful of us, and mindful of us to the degree that he gives us a law that Matthew 22:39 says, love your neighbor as yourself. That's where you talk to an agnostic, you talk to a skeptic, and you basically ask the question, if we were all following the moral principles of the Bible, if we did that, would the world not be a better place? And every agnostic and skeptic has to say yes. Like we said, heterosexual monogamy, keeping your children, I'm saying planned children who receive love, attention, and discipline from their parents. They then grow up through their education process. When they grow up, they're now an honest, hardworking member of society that's dedicated to what? What we just said. A heterosexual monogamous marriage, a bringing up and love, nurture for your kids, and a respect for your fellow man. If we were all following the moral principles, the ultimate lawgiver, if we were all following those principles, the world would be a fantastic place. We don't covet what our neighbor has, right? We respect their boundaries, and we become thankful for what we have. We practice contentment out of 1 Timothy 6. It's not just that he created everything, it's that he is mindful of the creation, and he manifests his mindfulness through giving us a law to where we're good to each other. And then the biggest part of it, you say he's the creator of the universe and he is the ultimate lawgiver. I always attach this. I don't think if this element was in there that those previous points would have too much to do with us. If it was just a system of, you popped up one day, you're here, you exist, and you die, and there is no afterlife, then this idea of who created what and where did we get our law is not going to have too much bearing. And that's where the third point is, where we say he loves us enough to save us. And that's Romans 5:6. He gives us a law that teaches us to love him and to love each other. You love your neighbor as you love yourself. But in this system, we recognize we're not going to keep it perfectly. And then that's where he says, and I'm going to save you from those imperfections. Romans 5:6, Christ died for the ungodly. So when you look at a class like we had today, where we said, we're fortifying our belief in the text through historical finds, archaeological finds. This is what we're shooting towards. I did not give you argumentation just to go out and argue with an atheist. I gave you information for your argumentation with an atheist so that he sees the value of these 2 points and that this is the end goal. God loves them and he wants them to be saved. They're just not there yet. And it's going to take real Christians who love their fellow man enough to put in the study time for all of this and then have the courage and the energy to go out and talk to a stranger who at the moment kind of thinks you're a bit of a nut. Do you have that in you? What we're saying is, do you have love for your fellow man to talk to them about these things? Now, I say this as we close out today. You thought this class was for the skeptic, but really it was for us. All this information was designed for us to have the end effect, the end goal of Luke 17:5, where the disciples said, Lord, increase our faith, and Mark 9:24, where he says, Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief. I hope that as we looked at this information today, you say, wow, the historical data, the archaeological data, you say, I already believed in the Bible. This is helping me have even more belief. But I say, as you are increasing in faith and you have even more belief, how does that look for you and your fellow man? You got to share it with them. This is what we did. We've set the scene for our study of the prophets. I would read the prophets, but I just never know what's going on in there. Well, now you know who the major players are, and you know how they all came in contact with each other. 4 major players: Israel into Assyria, Judah into Babylon, and the Assyrian kings through our storyline are Tiglath-Pileser, Shalmaneser, Sargon, and Sennacherib. And then that starts moving us into looking at Judah and Babylon. But now what we get to start doing is, now that we see the players and we see who the opponents are, the Assyrian kings, now we get to start reading what the prophets were saying about these people. So, come back next time, Wednesday morning, 10 a.m. We'll have more What Does the Bible Say Tonight at 9 p.m. We'll have What Does the Bible Say Tomorrow Night live at 8 p.m. as we go out. 276-806-3641, calebgrobertson@gmail.com. Email me there and we'll get you on the weekly informer list. Keep asking, what does the Bible say? You have a good rest of the day. God bless you.